Hi, my name is Dorian, and this is You, Me, and the Industry, a podcast where I get to hang out with people from the games industry and talk with them about their job, the industry, and a bunch of other stuff. This episode, I am joined by writer, designer, and trailer expert Gary Kings. He is part of National Insecurities and created games such as Once Upon a Crime in the West, as well as 2001, A Space Felony. Two, in my opinion, excellent murder mysteries. We talk about what makes a good murder mystery, the potentially legendary Dopesmoker cut of the animated Hobbit movie, game jams, and much more. Furthermore, I get to pick his brain on some of the most infamous trailer makers in the world and ask him what does he think about their trailer making skills. Here we go. Hello everyone and welcome to the show. With me today is Gary Kings, who is a designer at National Insecurities, freelance writer and the creator of some truly cool video game trailers. He worked on games such as 2001, A Space Felony and Once Upon a Crime in the West. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
Not too bad. I got my vaccine shot 2 days ago, and I feel way too powerful now. So you got me at a good time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think I'm also up for the second one tomorrow. So it's like the power can't be contained anymore.
Yeah, I mean, like I was told to expect to be, like ill for the first couple of days, but like I came home and I sat down and we had an impromptu like Halo thing because I run a little Halo community in a Discord, and we sat down and played some Halo for a couple of hours, and I was like twice as good as I usually am, and I'm like, is this the vaccine? Is it working?
Yeah.
I've become too powerful now.
It might also be just like the super serum from Captain America.
Yeah, it might just be that. Like, I'm just gonna be really buff in a couple of days. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. I mean, also like it also amplifies things. So like if you're like a really like a shitty person or like a cynical person, it just makes you more cynical. So I guess since you were really good at Halo, yeah. So you're just like a really cynical Halo professional now.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It was, or maybe it's more like the Venom symbiote. It's just gonna be a nightmare to live with.
Right. I mean, didn't they change the name to what's it called, like symbiote? I haven't watched the movie. Didn't they weirdly change the movie, like the name of the thing, the weird pronunciation?
I don't really know.
I haven't watched the movie either, but I think from the trailers they said like symbiote or something. I'm just like, wait,
symbiote.
Like, okay, I guess.
Really overpronounce it.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, as it is courtesy here at Yumi in Industry, I usually let the guest bring a topic to the show. So Gary, do you have something for us to talk about?
Yeah, I do. Like, another thing from this weekend that's just kind of come up is I finally released a fan edit of The Hobbit. I just released it on Twitter.
Right.
And that was just because I tweeted about this in like 2018 and it got like 12 likes. People were like, oh, this seems cool. Because I started doing a fan edit, which was much more ambitious than the one I released, which was taking the video of the animated Hobbit movie from 1977 and taking the audio from that and editing the video of the Peter Jackson movie to it to make something very comical.
Right.
And that was a nightmare to edit, and I promised it would be out by the end of the year, and I simply gave up on it. There were too many structural differences. But one thing that I also tweeted about in that same thread was a much easier edit. It's called the Hobbit Dopesmoker edition, which is basically, there's this one song which is 63 minutes long by a sort of a stoner rock band called Sleep. They're really good. They're very crunchy, make very crunchy noises.
Right.
And 63-minute tracks called Dopesmoker. And I just took the animated movie The Hobbit, removed its audio, stuck the audio of Dopesmoker in it, and then I adjusted the speed of the Hobbit movie by 20%, which isn't very noticeable considering the animation style, and to match the approximate length of this thing. So the end result is literally just this incredible visual audio tone piece where these two things mesh together really well. I tweeted out 2 minutes of the video, and people were like, cool, and that was 12 likes in 2018. A couple of days ago, though, I ended up like bringing it up in a thread with someone who had many followers. They retweeted it. and it took off, and people started being like, release the Dopesmoker edit, and I was like, okay then. So I released it last night. I had to rejig it a little bit to like meet my newly higher standards.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I ended up just putting that out, and people are really enjoying it. It's got like 2,000 likes. Most of my tweets get like 10 likes or something. I just have the same 9 people who really like me, and then one rando. But yeah, it's really nice to have that out there. Like I do fan edits sometimes. I did a fan edit of Blade Runner 2049, which removed all of the dialogue and made it, again, it was an audiovisual tone piece, because I took this movie, and by removing all of the dialogue and only keeping in a lot of the sort of broader shots, it created this kind of visual tone piece that went really well with layering the soundtrack underneath it.
Right.
And so that ended up being a 50-minute movie of sorts, and people really liked that back then as well. It's just a thing that I really like doing. It's really nice to have that out there. It was really nice to have people being like, yeah, release this. And I'm like, oh, people want this? This isn't just some silly joke I came up with that I've just unironically watched several times a year since. Okay. So, yeah, it's good to have that out there. It's really nice to just kind of work on a thing and just have it be appreciated, have it be seen on some level, you know?
Yeah, totally. I think, like, it is weird with like now the Dopesmoker edits and like the Dopesmoker cut or something. It's like, yeah. I think this is like the one thing, like, I'm really happy for all the people who love like the Snyder cut and everything, and I'm pretty sure it's like a better movie. Not like there's no debate about that, I think. But it really hurts my soul that we are now living in this timeline where everybody claims or like wants the X cut. Like, please give us like the J.J. Abrams cut or something. Like, give us the cut of this, and then like, I think like they should. It's like it was like what is it like? And you should never like give in to terrorists or like hostage situations or something. And now it's like it finally happened. So now they can now they can do this all the time. Like, we can now wait for the George Lucas like cut, and the like give us the Guillermo del Toro like Hobbit cut. I'm just like, enough already.
Well,
like,
I mean, he doesn't have a cut, but like the George Lucas cut of the original Star Wars would be really interesting just to see how bad it is, because like you know, so much of what that movie came together in the editing with his wife editing. I forget her name now. I always forget her name. But yeah, like that is a similar situation with like Mad Max Fury Road. So much of that is in the editing as well. It's just like brilliant stuff, but like it is always a sad thing when you see as much as I don't appreciate Zack Snyder one bit, but like to see to see like studios basically just removing creative control from the people that they put into creative control. It's like, what are you doing? This is literally the person you decided to trust. It's like, what even is movie making if not like an expression of someone? And if you remove that someone from the expression, it's like, then what is this? It's just an empty thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's like, it's always sad. Like, as much as I think, you know, I do quite like the Marvel movies, I really appreciate like what they're up to, but I also think a lot of them are just really sort of middling movies.
Right.
But like, it's just all the better ones are the ones that very obviously were given to someone who had some kind of vision for it, like Black Panther or Thor 3, you know, those sorts of things. You end up with these really some actual personality to them. Whereas something like Spider-Man Far From Home, I honestly don't think is a very good movie at all. It's just it feels like an empty product, you know?
Right.
So yeah, it's those sorts of things are really interesting. And I really think that every movie should have a Dopesmoker edit. Just speed up the play speed of every single movie in existence so it matches the length of Dopesmoker by sleep. Just see how it works.
Right. I think if you watch like movies like, what is it called? Like one of the like really really long movies. I think like, let's just take like the Irishman. I think this would work really really well, I think.
Oh, it'd be really really long, and therefore it would be like you'd have like this digital Robert De Niro being really fast to Dopesmoker. The thing about Dopesmoker though is it's such a slow song, so speeding up anything to it is weird. It just happens so that, you know, the Hobbit animated movie is only 70 minutes, so it works really well. Yeah. But yeah, it's like this really crunchy is good. Right. It's just absolutely dripping. That song is absolutely dripping, and so like if I sped up anything longer to it, it probably wouldn't work.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed, if this episode will be around 70 minutes, then we can just make the Dopesmoker edit. Let's just increase our speech patterns and everything, and then we just have like the Dopesmoker podcast episode with Gary Kings.
That'd be very good. I'll be very happy to put that together.
Yeah, I mean it's cool. You know, then I will have edited the episode with like splicing like our like recordings together, and then you will edit the edit, and then make the Dopesmoker edit out of it. So we've come full circle.
It'd probably be like breaking some kind of copyright. I mean, the Dopesmoker edit of The Hobbit, I just sort of open up with, I own nothing. I sold nothing. Please do not come for me.
Yes.
I'm too tired for that.
Yes.
And I just hope that nobody chases me down. Like, what lawyers are out here, like, sniping at people who are pirating only the imagery of The Hobbit 1977 animated. They haven't even released that movie on Blu-ray. They aren't selling that movie in any meaningful capacity.
Right.
And yeah, Dopesmoker, I think, honestly, I'd like to think that the band Sleep would really appreciate the Dopesmoker edit. They would just be like, wow, this is the coolest thing, and then just watch it together. But who knows? I don't know those guys.
Right.
They might be really uptight about it. The whole Metallica situation.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned like you can't really talk about your upcoming game, but I mean, maybe if this podcast goes viral with the Dopesmoker edit, you can maybe get like them to do like a live recording of Dopesmoke for like 36 minutes again, and then you can like splice the game together, like to make like, because I think some of your other games are like around an hour, so maybe you can save some development time and just make
2001 A Space Felony Dopesmoker edit.
Yeah,
I think I could actually, to be honest, I could never change what the sound of 2001, like the music that I have in there is so carefully selected.
Yeah, right.
And I even carefully selected it in a way that is kind of it's a joke that only I get, but I guess I'll just describe it here for the hell of it. 'Cause at this point, it's like we're like 3-4 years deep, right? Like nobody's gonna just get this joke. I'm fine to just leak it out to the world.
Sure.
But like, it's like in the book 2001, it's David Bowman is after he dismantles Hal, he's alone for like 3 months, and there's a chapter covering that. The movie just doesn't cover because, like, what's the point?
Right.
And it describes what music he listens to, and I basically put together a playlist of like these classical pieces of music that are all in the public domain very carefully to match pretty much what he was listening to in those 3 months.
Right.
And nobody would ever like spot that, and that's fine. I'm fine with that. Sometimes you gotta do one just for you, right?
Right.
But yeah, like that. And the other thing is as well, on top of that, I very carefully selected recordings of each piece that wouldn't even be mistaken for ones that are in the public domain, because like I kept getting flagged by YouTube, and I didn't want people playing our game to just keep getting copyright claims, even though these recordings are absolutely in the public domain.
Right. Yeah.
Sort of thing is always happening.
Yeah, I mean, you know what's funny? Like, since you already brought it up, and I just right before the podcast, I finished this exact game, and I was really interested by some of the choices here. But then I also made like a tiny let's play, and if you're lucky, you can now find it on my YouTube channel also. And nice. There was like this like a moment where like the music kicks in, and it was so funny because like I also made the joke on the Let's Play, so who cares, right? But it was like a piece like from Mozart or something, and I was like, well, you know, like it's funny because like this music I know associate with like an anime from like Neon Genesis Evangelion, and it's not like Mozart didn't predict this, right? I mean, Mozart was like clearly not expecting like some asshole in Germany playing a game from a guy from UK and then putting over like the music from his legacy, and he composed it like, you know, like it is like his masterpiece or something, and I'm now thinking like, yeah, right, that was from that one scene where the Evangelion fought the other ones. That's incredible. I always loved this scene. And he was like pouring in all like his soul and like his sadness into the music, and well, you know, it's too bad because now it's not in the folder of Mozart anymore. It's now in the anime folder. So
I kind of came at it from the back end that way as well with some of this music. So music that I use in Disorient on the Murder Express, I think it is in the public domain, but I never charged any money for that game. So sue me, please don't. The music I used for that was gosh, what is it called? It's just completely escaped my mind. I think it's Handel Peaceful. Anyway, it's a track which I first heard in a scene in The Raid 2, which features a man in a snowy alleyway stabbing someone repeatedly. It's like they use this piece to great effect in this, dumbass action movie. Which is again a weird fucking thing because it's like it's an Indonesian action movie that's directed by a Welshman. It's really quite this bizarre thing, The Raid 2. But like I first heard it there, I was like, wow, that's a powerful piece of music for this Indonesian action movie directed by a Welshman. But it turns out it's Handel Sarabande, which is just this really beautiful piece. And I was just like, I was just listening to it a lot whilst making the game, and I was like, I'm just gonna use it in the game. It was a game jam at the time, so I was just like, I'm just gonna put this in there and have it on loop. It's fine. It's a track that like the game itself takes 15 minutes to go through, and the track is maybe the version I used was maybe like 5 minutes, so it like loops 3 times, and that's fine because it's such a good piece that it's just fine. It's fine to listen to it 3 times. So yeah, like often with these sorts of things, I like classical music. I'm not a classical music guy. I do really like classical music, but like you, I kind of like a lot of my reference points for these things are from popular culture. This Beethoven piece, weirdly, is one of the most famous Beethoven pieces. I think it's like Movement 7 from it might be Symphony 7 Movement 2 which I used towards the end of that thing. I first heard that in Mr. Robot of all places, the TV show, and I was like, this is great. What is this? Oh, it's Beethoven. How have I never heard this before? It's like, so I was like, yeah, okay, I'll put that in there as well if I can. But yeah, it's really interesting that like that like we end up just like pulling all of well, basically I guess all these creators have sort of like they're always pulling from classical music to get the feeling that they need. And it's interesting when you end up like coming up on these from the back end, you're like, gosh, I'm so uncultured, but then you realize, wait, I'm not that uncultured. I've been watching an anime from Japan that has a German composer in it, and like it's actually, this is just like the way that art works. It's just all these things bleed into each other in this beautiful way.
Exactly. And well, you just mentioned the game jam, and let's just kick it off with here, I guess. As a person who has never been on a game jam, so maybe you can, fill me in. Like, what am I missing, really?
I think they're really wonderful. I've been to several game jams. I haven't been to one in a while, not just because of the pandemic, but because once I started, making games and getting paid to make games, I just ended up having no time to also do other games, which is a shame because they're so good. But yeah, I've been to failed game jams, and I've been to like game jams where I created some really great work, which ended up being, in the case of Disorient on the Murder Express, effectively kickstarted a lot of what my career ended up being. And I would say that I don't regret a single one of these game jams, even the ones where we didn't end up creating anything, just because they're a lot of fun to be at. I think there's a certain novelty to I guess this is a contentious point. We're getting into the controversial takes here. There's a certain novelty to
already
yourself. A lot of people talk about like crunch and crunch culture and all these things, and yeah, these are all valid points to be bringing up and stuff. There was this really bad discourse that was floating around online a couple of years ago, which was about like, oh, game jams promote crunch discourse. I don't think it does, but like but I do think that identifying similar things between the two, that is accurate in the sense that you are effectively sort of overworking yourself for a weekend, which is, but at the same time, I don't think it promotes crunch culture. What I'd actually say is that game jams, I'd say it's like game jams are kind of unhealthy, but they're unhealthy like a McDonald's is unhealthy, which is why you don't eat McDonald's every day. You're just like, oh, maybe I'll treat myself to a McDonald's. I haven't had one of them in 3 or 4 months or something like, it's just one of these things that you sometimes do because you're like, you know what, I could really go for one of those right now. And I think that's like why so much of the, the culture around crunch and stuff is so sort of like braggadocious, like people like, oh man, I stayed up 3 nights in a row to get this game ready for launch, and you're just like, that isn't something to brag about. There is some kind of novelty in that. There is a kind of pride in that, which I think it's worth recognizing. And I think both of these things can exist at the same time. 1, be proud of how much you worked in that time, and 2, recognize that it's unhealthy and don't make that normal.
Right. Yeah,
And I think
exactly.
that it's fine to have those two things at the same time. In the case of game jams, like it's really important to make sure that like you're not just like finishing work on a Friday and going back to work on a Monday, and in that entire time you're just
Right.
working over the weekend, because then you've just deleted the rest that your body needs. So it'd be good that whether it be on the one side, before you start, have a day or two off, and on the other side have a day or two off, and then while you're actually doing it, I think as well, like it can be game jams can be useful in the sense that you can really it can kind of teach you how to manage that sort of thing, in the sense that the best game jams I ever did were ones where I slept properly, rather than being like, I'm going to stay up really, really late to get this thing done.
Right.
The very best one that I did, I actually slept at weird times, which allowed me to do some work in the night while my friends were asleep, and then hand over the baton to them when they woke up, which was good. It turns out that was good, but the key thing was I still slept the correct amount. So yeah, it's like it's I do think that game jams are kind of wonderful, because not just because of all these things, but also just as a kind of social thing, because these game development is often just like this very jobby thing. It's a very sort of like technical thing. There are ways in which it can sort of get bogged down in just how much of a job and just how technical it is. And often, like when you're working in game dev, you're working with the same 6 people as well. You just got this little bubble around you of the same people over and over again. It's really good to kind of break out of that and just have like a social experience where you're learning other people, basically. It's great to just sort of collaborate with new people and try these things on. And it's fine if it's not good. If it turns out you pick 6 people from a room, you're like, we're going to make a game together, and it turns out that 2 of those people don't pull their weight, or it turns out they're terrible people, whatever. That's just part of this experience, right? It's the loot box. It's a loot box of making a game. And that's just one of the many things that you kind of have to deal with, one of the challenges that gets thrown into the mix. And I really, really like that. Every time I've gone into a game jam, I'm like, oh, but what if we don't make anything?
Right.
And we always come out with something valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily super, like, polished or anything, because that's not the point, but often it's something really interesting. I've had some game jams where we're all on the same page. I've had some game jams where we argue. But like, I find every single one of those game jams to have been incredibly valuable. And it's great to be able to take on different roles as well. One time I was like, I will not be the programmer, because I'm not a programmer.
Right.
I know how to noodle in Unreal Engine 4. Anyway, I was then the programmer. Instead of being the programmer for that one. And then my friend, who decided to work on his own, his computer just failed him, and like his idea that he was working on just didn't work anyway. And he was like, well, what do I do with my game jam now? It's like, just join our team. You're also half a programmer like me. Together, you can be a full programmer and make this game work. And that time we made a game called Ribvolver, which was like a little... it was a top-down 4-player game. It's really hard to play with, because you need to get 4 people with controllers at a PC.
Right.
But like, it's a top-down quick draw game in which you are all frogs in like a circle, like it's like the 3 men at the end of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, like waiting to draw on each other.
Right.
Every single frog has 2 guns and 1 bullet in each of them. So that means that everyone has 2 bullets, but 3 opponents. So you don't really want to be the first person to draw and fire, right? Because that puts you at a disadvantage. You're kind of hoping that at least one of your opponents will shoot one of your other opponent first, right? You just kind of... that sort of thing. And it ends up being... so, like, the first few times people play it, they all just quick draw, and it ends up being a messy little thing. And then after a couple of times, they're like, wait a second. And then after that, the last few games, before the game wears out its welcome, becomes, like, this really intense kind of overthinking little strategy game where it's, like, hoping that they'll because the other thing is as well, we've got the frog's eyes. We made it so that you can't you haven't necessarily drawn your gun immediately,
right,
but the frog's eyes look where you're pointing the individual eyes will look where you're pointing the stick, so you can look at who they're trying on and aim at, who they're planning to draw at, so you can kind of like really spy these things. There's a lot of
Right.
depth to this really simple little game, and I really appreciate that one. I think it's that's one of my favorite games that we made at a game jam. And sometimes, in that case, I was working with people I'd worked with before, but other times you could just be working with completely random people, and I found collaborators that way. The lady that did the music for Once Upon a Crime in the West and also helped us with the audio recording, the voice recording stuff for 2001: A Space Felony.
Right.
Anne-Sophie Ovria, she is someone that I met at my very first game jam.
Okay.
And the guy who made the human people in the space suits and stuff, and ground control sat behind his little desk for 2001. I met him at the same game jam. It's just little things like this. Like it's just a great way to bump into a bunch of people and just see what comes of it,
Right, yeah, makes sense.
I love game jams. I'm a huge advocate for them. I'm also a huge advocate for being really responsible with them, but at the same time, they're kind of there to let you make mistakes. They're a safe space to make mistakes at. And it's a safe space to do unsafe things, such as overwork yourself for a weekend, right? And learn that maybe you shouldn't do that all the time. It's fine.
Right, yeah. I mean, yeah, makes sense. I guess, yeah, since there are no stakes here, everybody can make mistakes, and it's pretty fine, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the best times are actually always when everyone's like, I'm stuck.
Right.
Let's just leave the building, go to the building opposite, and eat just some very greasy noodles and talk about this.
Yeah.
That's always my favorite moments of any game jam, because you always end up coming back fired up and being like, I know exactly what I need to do now.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Yeah.
Noodles, they solve everything.
Yeah. And, well, you just mentioned it, 2001: A Space Felony, and also you mentioned being stuck. So let's go towards this game. And, I was stuck for a moment here and there. And I find it interesting when you are like also designing the game and also writing the game. It's like, how do you design a puzzle game like this? Like, it is a murder mystery after all. So how do you design it like this? And how do you anticipate the stupidity of myself for these kinds of games?
That sort of thing is actually really tricky, but the first thing to note is always that getting stuck is part of the formula.
Right.
If people aren't stuck, then they have a less good time of it, and that was sort of proved by Once Upon a Crime in the West. There's a degree to which we made that slightly too easy for some people, and some people were like, yeah, I just breezed through it, and like they didn't quite get the intended experience. The point is though, it's really hard to judge these things.
Right. Yeah.
2001, we actually got quite right first time. I think part of the reason why 2001 ended up being as good as it was because we effectively rush made a prototype in 6 weeks.
Okay.
And we took it to an event. And that included full voice recordings. We went up to Cardiff, where I used to live, and I took my laptop and my microphone, and we went and worked with a voice actor that I'd worked with during university, Max McLaren, and he's brilliant, good Scottish boy, and we wanted our robot to be Scottish because we just found that very funny, right? Like having our AI be kind of Scottish. So we went to him, and he introduced us to his American friend, Adam Pelter-Pauls, who he went to university with. And he did the voice stuff for ground control. But effectively, we did very quick and dirty sort of recording of the entire script for that game in the space of 2 days. And then we took that version of the game to an event. So that game was like a fully fledged game by that point. It was just broken as shit. And it didn't contain enough tutorialization. But like, the fact that I was there meant that I could effectively walk people through it, and then once people knew how the game worked, then they would go about solving the mystery with those mechanics. So buttons where they could go about that. And there's a degree to which we're very lucky that we got a lot of that stuff right the first time. Like you would think of it, being a person who played that game, you'd think of it as one big mystery, right?
Yeah, right.
The way that we thought about it behind the scenes was that there's actually 6 mysteries. I'm sorry, my dogs have just begun barking. It's actually 6 big mysteries. There's like basically it's like what happened to the guy at the satellite, what happened to this person here. We think of
Right.
them as almost like levels in a video game that you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
approach in
right.
order. And there is some crossover as
Yeah.
well with like what pieces of evidence go where and stuff. But like fundamentally, it's 6 mysteries, and in the original build we only had 5 mysteries. I think it was the area in the engineering bay where it's got like the big turbine thing and stuff like that. That stuff just didn't exist. Like there were several pieces of evidence that were in there that didn't exist. That's why if you think about how that game works, a lot of that stuff is actually quite self-contained.
Right.
It doesn't really bring in elements from the outside of that room, except for the lady in the cryopod who we had different plans for in the original version.
Oh, I see.
But effectively doing it this way allowed us to try the game out with a bunch of people and then have a second go at it and like rewrite certain lines to make sure that like, what if they don't understand that these two things are connected? Well, there's several things you can do with that. You can write it so that like 2 sentences have a similar rhythm to each other. Like there's a lot of really interesting little things you can do. Similar rhythm is one of the things that I really liked employing, and that is that like, because the great difficulty of making these things is telling them the answer without telling them the answer, making them feel like it's their idea. So the best way to often do that is subconsciously. So in this case, it's like, what if these two things are connected? The way that we describe this thing over here, this is how we describe it, and this is how we get the actor to act that sentence. And then this piece of evidence over here that's connected to it but is quite distant in people's minds. What if we just had a very similar sentence delivered in a very similar way, and then their brains don't necessarily say, the game is telling me that these two things are connected. Instead, their brains just casually park those two pieces of information next to each other, and that proximity then leads to them connecting the dots themselves. So there's a lot of things you can do with that, but in the end, like I did say that, like, being stuck is part of it, and like that was always the hardest thing to watch when I went to events with the game. Was I would be looking over someone's shoulder and they would just be staring at a wall, and I'm like, oh no, they're bored. Oh god, they're so bored. Oh, look how bored they are. And then they'd be like, I've got it. And then they would like frantically rush around and do a thing. And then they would feel like a genius. I'm like, oh, wait, I designed that in there. They're supposed to stare.
Right.
Because like 90% of this game actually happens inside somebody's head.
Yeah, right.
But in the end, it like ended up being that, we added that extra piece, what we call Mystery 6, the engineering bay mystery. We added that after the fact, and we didn't actually have time to test that first.
Oh, okay.
So we just had to get that right first time. But we felt pretty confident in it. But we nearly fucked it up, in the sense that I wrote and recorded it in such a way that it would actually mechanically, the way that these things connect, the ways that you like compare these things, you get your statement and contradictions and things, it would actually be the most complicated and therefore most difficult mystery in the game. And then I woke up one day and realized that was wrong, because the previous hardest mystery was the guy who is dead outside the satellite dish. It's a really interesting piece of imagery, the satellite dish, the guy floating in space, the busted helmet, all of that stuff.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then that connects to the pod, which has like blood on the handle. Exactly. That stuff is all really interesting. And I realized you should only make something in these kinds of games. You should only make something as difficult as they are interesting.
Right.
And the engineering bay mystery, as much as it has an interesting conclusion to it. The setup is, why is this door open?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's just not an interesting setup. So I was like, oh no, I need to scale it back. I need to make it a lot easier than it is, because people aren't going to be like, why is this door open, when they're surrounded by, why is this guy's bloody skull all bloody, and why is this over here like this? Because it was the least interesting setup, but one of the more interesting conclusions.
Right.
So I luckily I looked at the script, because we had recorded it the previous day. I hadn't edited it together yet, and I was like, do I need to re-record anything with this? Can I recreate a simpler structure for how you solve this out of what we've recorded? And it turns out, yes, I just needed to delete a couple of lines, which we had already recorded, and merge a couple of other ones, luckily. But I could have got re-recorded some stuff. But yeah, the set, like, the fact that we had like 2 goes at that was really, really crucial. Once Upon a Crime in the West, we didn't have 2 goes at that, and that's kind of why a lot of that stuff didn't quite work as well. But luckily for Once Upon a Crime in the West, it has more than one trick, I'd say. So I'd say that 2001: A Space Felony has one trick, and we had to get it right. And I'm glad to say that I think we did. Once Upon a Crime in the West has a lot of tricks up its sleeve. So if one thing doesn't quite land, then a couple of other things might, you know?
Right, yeah.
It's a lot more ambitious a game. It has a lot going on with it, and people can just it's actually fine for people to just sit and largely take in this game and then kind of and then sort of solve the thing quite quickly.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, the answer is let them get stuck, but also make things only as difficult as they are interesting.
Right, yeah. You know what's funny? Like, you just talked all about the mysteries and everything, but 2 things that I found very, very interesting about both of these games. There were 2 certain design things that were really, really fascinating. So with Once Upon a Crime in the West, I found the introduction really, really breathtaking. It was like the letterboxing, and then also like the wind, like the trees were waving in the wind.
Drums.
Yeah. That was
really late. I got Anne-Sophie over here. I was just like, I want a Western soundtrack that isn't a Western soundtrack.
Right.
And she was like, what the hell does that mean? And I was like, strip out all of the harmonicas, all the guitars, all of that stuff that was built to glorify the Western, right? To say, look how cool the cowboy is, and leave only the violence, leave only the drums. And she was like, you want me to make a track that's 2 minutes long that only uses drums? And I was like, yes. And she came back to me the next day with a track. And I was like, great.
That was awesome, yeah. And also the design of like the room which Mel lives in, I guess. Yeah. It was stunning. It was really, really lovely.
Yeah, that was one of the earliest things that we designed, and one of the earliest things that we technically put together. It's actually one of the more simple technical things, but it also is. It runs so well as well.
Yeah.
Like, expect that to be the if, say, for example, if you're looking at frame rates or whatever, you'd expect that to be the room that like chugs, right? But it turns out it's really efficient because Lauren is a brilliant programmer, and we did that really early. I remember she sent me she had this she came up with the idea of like tiling it like a mosaic and having it like move around the room and stuff. All I really wanted was my original idea was it was going to be like you ever see that room in Alien where they talk to the AI mother?
Yeah, right.
Little LEDs. My initial idea was something like that. But Lauren was like, what if we had a shitload of these screens, just like triangular screens? What if it moved around? And then she made it blink. And she sent me a video of it blinking, and I was like, I got chills immediately. I felt like I had just seen like a photo scan of like my baby. It's like, oh my god, it's my child.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that was. I really love the Mal imagery. I still have it as a as my lock screen background on my phone, whereas I use my my home background is the mountain from Once Upon a Crime in the West. So.
Right. Yeah, those were really great. You know what's also funny? It's I think it wasn't intentional, but I guess it was a bug because I just looked it up of another playthrough, but I sort of missed one screen and then the laughing didn't stop, and I was just like, oh, I guess this is just the end. Like he just lost his mind and then said, okay, I'm leaving. And then the laughing continued through all the dialogue afterwards, and then also like all the credits rolled, and then were like the music, and also the laughing was still continuing. I was just like, I'm not quite sure. God. Is it a bug or not? But it was so like it was very haunting.
A bug, yeah. But at the same, the effect of that is beautiful in itself. So
yeah, it was really haunting. So I guess it was more special than to me because I was like, please stop, let me out.
Yeah. So we have this whole thing with Once Upon a Crime in 2001: A Space Felony, where it's like we actually do have 2 endings, but we don't really flag that we have 2 endings. Yeah, right. And one of those endings, I guess what you have done is accidentally unlocked the 3rd secret ending that I didn't even know existed. One of those endings, because basically he says, spoilers for anyone listening, you then deactivated Mal. He says this in past tense, like it's true, because everything that happens with ground control is effectively happening in the future.
Right, yeah, exactly.
We love playing with non-linearity, as you may have noticed.
Yeah.
But like, basically, you can at that point you can then choose to be like, no, I didn't, and then just leave. And if you leave, then he corrects himself. He's like, oh wait, My mistake. It turns out that you didn't deactivate
Yeah,
Mal.
right, exactly.
It's like what I think is so I've played a bunch of Telltale games. I think they're great. I've played a bunch of various games that have all these interesting choices in them, but the thing that always bothered me was how much actually flagging the choice for you undermines the choice in itself.
Yeah, right.
And I find that just by giving you, just by effectively telling you what to do, and then facilitating the possibility that they might rebel against what they're told,
Right.
that makes that decision so much more impactful. Like everybody who ever found the version of the ending where they leave instead of deactivate Mal, they found that to be really powerful just because it's like a thing, right? It's
right.
just kind of, I did this. The game never told me to do this.
Exactly.
I expressed myself, and the great thing is that the entire game you've effectively been doing exactly what you were told.
Yeah, right.
Comically so, to the point where like you literally spent an entire year on a spaceship with Mal,
Right.
waiting for the pod to come back.
Right.
So yeah, it's like those sorts of things I am always really interested in. Choices in games. We literally came out of university with this game called The Old Gods Are Dead, which we tried to get funding for, which was all about moral choices in games.
Right.
I am so glad that game never came out because it was like really pretentious. It was really It was just like it completely read like university students had done it because it read like people who thought they knew everything.
Right.
It was very Stanley Parable-ish, it kind of had these it was kind of playful about it, but at the same time it's like it was commenting on things that were feel just too obvious to the me that I am now. Like if I played that game now, somebody else made it, I'd be like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
So I'm actually really glad that game didn't get funding, and that 2001: A Space Felony, which ended up being like a side project. I was like, all right, I'll just noodle about with the murder mysteries while I'm, waiting for someone to hand me a bag of money for The Old Gods Are Dead.
Right.
And then that took off instead, and I went in that direction.
Yeah.
Like 2001: A Space Felony. I can't think of a better game to have opened with, as much as it hasn't made all the money in the world.
True.
Far from it.
Yeah.
It's like I look at that game and I'm like, yeah, I don't think I would really change anything about that. And I know there's certain people who don't especially like the game, and that's fine. Not everybody's going to like your game. It turns out that I happen to like the game that I made so much. Whereas Once Upon a Crime in the West, there are a few things I would change about that,
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just really glad that we opened with 2001. Like, it's kind of a big deal to me.
Yeah, and I mean it's an awesome game, to be honest. And let's maybe take it from here. So what makes a good murder mystery game? So for example, like there are like a couple of series that are dabbling into these. So like Danganronpa, for example, or I guess Ace Attorney, or I mean Hitman to some extent recently did the same. So like
I love it. I love the Hitman thing.
Yeah, and also I guess Obra Dinn is the same. Like what makes a good mystery for you then?
Okay, so for me, I'll just like try and cover a bunch of games at once. But
Sure.
Ace Attorney, I'll hit right on the head, which is basically initially I started making murder mystery games because I identified that a lot of mystery games aren't actually mystery games. They're adventure games with mystery flavoring. So they'll be just adventure games, and a lot of the time they'd be giving you the answers as you go. But
Right.
much like watching an episode of Columbo, you aren't really solving anything. You're watching the media that you're taking in solve the mystery,
Yeah.
but you are taking in the part where you walk around and find clues. A lot of them are clue hunts, and sometimes you make decisions, but in the end it all comes down to the end. I think like a lot of it came from the spite that I had in my soul after playing LA Noire. That was like the starting point for me. I didn't realize it till years later, but for me, like the disappointment I felt in LA Noire is actually what started me thinking about these things. Ace Attorney was basically 2001: A Space Felony is me identifying. Okay, yeah. So there may be largely no such thing as murder mystery games. However, Ace Attorney kinda is one, and it really gets it right when it gets it right. So 2001: A Space Felony is effectively me playing on Ace Attorney. The idea being that like Ace Attorney is very linear. Like you go about that story, and then eventually at key moments it prompts you to go through a witness's statement
Yes.
and find a contradiction to it, and supply the evidence for why that contradiction is. And it's fucking glorious when that happens. It's the best part of the game. It's literally, the moment where you shout objection and you nail it. It's brilliant. I was like, so what if I made a whole game that was that? What if I made it so it's non-linear, so that like you have these 18 pieces of evidence which are in themselves statements. You ask the suspect, which is the AI Mal, about the thing, and he will give you a statement, and then you use other things, other pieces of evidence, or his statements that he made on those as evidence against what he's saying about this piece of evidence. Yeah. So basically, I was like, that moment in Ace Attorney is brilliant. What if we made a whole game out of that? What if we made it non-linear? So effectively, because Ace Attorney would never do it. I felt like I wanted to take the Ace Attorney formula to its logical conclusion, and I feel like I was successful in that. I don't think it ever makes sense to make a game in which 6 of these exist. That's how Ace Attorney is. It's got 6 missions, and like they're all kind of structured the same. It would make no sense to do this 6 times, and so a game that's like 60 minutes to 90 minutes. It makes sense for this to just be that kind of experiment and then end.
Right.
So yeah, for me, like what makes a good mystery game largely comes down to actually putting the deduction parts into the player's hands. I think the Obra Dinn does this really well. It won awards for it. I was well aware of the Obra Dinn when I was making 2001 because I had just finished making Disorient on the Murder Express, and then I played the GDC demo that Luke Pope released on itch.io for the Obra Dinn, and it was really interesting because it was like there were only really 8 bodies to solve effectively, but what he had done was he created systems through which you could express complicated ideas through mechanics, and that's interesting. That's difficult to do. That's like the hardest thing to do. And even though I really liked what he had done there, I decided that I didn't want to do exactly what he did. What I wanted to do was, so what he had done is he had created complex mechanics that were still understandable. The difficulty for him was making it so that people would understand his complex mechanics.
Right.
So that then he could express complex things. For me, I wanted to have it so you'd be expressing complex ideas through very simple things. If you think about the structure of 2001, it's just a really big game of Snap. You are turning over one card, turning over another card,
right, yeah.
In response to that card. That is the entire. There are 2 pieces of mechanical vocabulary in 2001: A Space Felony, which is give me a statement on this. This thing contradicts your thing. Statements, contradiction. That's 2 buttons, and we literally have them mapped to 2 buttons. So that's what I wanted to do there. But then when Lucas Pope's game actually did come out, the Obra Dinn, because he had to then like expand his thing to 70 or 80 dead bodies on a ship.
Right. Yeah.
It meant that he had to add even more mechanics and even more complexity to it, and I honestly think that the final version of the game works less well than the GDC version just because he had to balloon it out perhaps a little bit further than it was comfortable going. But at the same time, I am in absolute awe of the Obra Dinn that it works at all.
Yeah, right.
It's a miracle that game works. It's incredible, and it deserves the awards that it got simply because it's just what it's doing. It doesn't make any sense that game is completable. I remember when he first released it, he tweeted, "Hey, I just released the Obra Dinn. It's sort of finished, ? That's kind of how he put it, and I felt that in my bones because I understood that, he's just throwing it out into the world. And if it turns out that even one of those 90-something mysteries in that game was too difficult, then the entire game is not solvable. Right. And I'm here with, like, a game which has 6 people dead in it, and I'm just like, I cannot imagine making a game of the scale that he just made.
Yeah, right.
And yeah, it worked. He put it out there, and yeah, some bits were a little bit more difficult than they really ought to have been, but it was all doable, and people were interested enough in it that they pressed themselves extra hard to get past those little moments, and it worked. On the opposite side of things, so I would call the Obra Dinn a mechanical murder mystery.
Right, yeah.
And I would call it basically in the same vein as the games that I make, mechanical murder mysteries. The other one is the adventure game type murder mystery. But that's not to say that the adventure game murder mysteries necessarily have to be bad murder mysteries. Because I think a great example of a recent one was Disco Elysium. If you play Disco Elysium, you don't actually have that much agency in the deduction. You're very rarely actually solving things yourself. The game is.
Right.
Every piece of information that you stumble upon, every single answer that you come across, is still a result of your agency, because so much of it is down to how you've built your character, like what kind of intuitions you gave him. Like, is he the kind of guy who does he have high drama? If he has high drama, then he can tell when people are acting, when they're lying.
Right, yeah.
You'll always come to the same conclusions eventually. But you'll come about them in different ways, and it always feels like a result of your agency through your expression as to who this person is. And so they managed to effectively sidestep the problem of players having no agency in the murder mystery by putting the agency on the back end.
Right.
And that's fascinating. I didn't even think that kind of game could exist, and then I played Disco Elysium and I was like, oh my god.
They did it.
So I guess that's the really, really long answer to all these things, is that there's many, many ways to do this. I did my way, Lucas Pope did his way, Disco Elysium does it its way, but the key thing is there needs to be proper agency in there somewhere, whether that be in the deductive reasoning or how those answers are reached. It all really just comes down to the mystery needs to be in the player's hands.
Right.
Don't rob them of that,
Yeah. And are there any tropes that you like really, really dislike? So, for example, like one of the more famous ones is like the locked room murder.
No, I think those are great. I honestly think that like tropes are a really good thing to play on because it allows. Sometimes it means that like the butler did it or something like that. I think that's the thing that Hitman actually does play on, is because the butler did have some interesting involvement in the thing.
Right. Yeah.
It allows people to exercise their brainy smarts through the game, but instead of expressing how clever they are at deducing things, they're kind of expressing their knowledge of TV tropes, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it doesn't matter as long as they're expressing some level of smart towards the game, and the game is recognizing that. Then it's fine. As for locked room stuff, that's just a great way to scope your game. So in the case of, but I think I would call all three of my murder mystery games: Disorient on the Murder Express, 2001: A Space Felony, Once Upon a Crime in the West. All of those are locked room murder mysteries, and so is Return of the Obra Dinn, simply because it allows it to be scoped. And when you end up with really broad, incredibly broad things like I guess you could call something like Paradise Killer a more open world thing. That becomes a lot more difficult to handle, and it also becomes a little bit less interesting. Paradise Killer ends up putting a lot of effort into making it interesting by making the characters so fucking bizarre, and I think that's the right way to go. But like, fundamentally, the mystery itself, the broader you make it, the less easy it is to solve and the less people want to solve it.
Right, yeah.
This room, it's like that whole, I think there's a Star Trek episode where they're like, this guy's room was locked and yet he was shot with what appears to be a laser sniper rifle. How did this happen?
Right, yeah.
And it ends up being some sci-fi bullshit, like someone shot a bullet that they then used a phaser rod to like transport it into the cabin and shoot the guy. It's interesting stuff. Like, locked room murder mysteries are in themselves fundamentally very compelling, and also just happen to be a great way to scope a video game.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And yeah, moving on to a different segment, I already talked about that you are involved in trailer making. So you make trailers for your games, and you make trailers for other people's games. And, you just mentioned Paradise, and it came to mind that with the recent passing of E3, there were a couple of trailers. And one of my standout trailers was I think it's called Stranger in Paradise, the Final Fantasy one, which was like quite interesting.
The chaos.
Chaos.
The chaos.
Right. The chaos rate.
Chaos is here. Right. I love that trailer.
Exactly. But, I saw a tweet by you, and you said, like, some of the standout trailers this year were Sable and Metroid Dread. So maybe you can talk about these two trailers compared to, like, I mean, I will now be the judge, and I will say, let's just say the Stranger in Paradise, even though it has a lot of meme potential, and it was one of the funniest trailers I've ever seen, and it was like eye rolling. Then I was like, why does it look like Unreal Tournament, the game from like 30 years ago running on a PS3 dev kit to like, you know, like why does this work, and like why do trailers like Sable work and Dread compared to something like this? Like, what is it about trailer making where you think like, okay, those have everything?
Yeah, so I think Sable and Metroid Dread have these basically they work on two completely different principles. I'll start with Sable because effectively Sable trailer is the kind of trailer that I might have made, right? Because it's for an indie game that not necessarily everybody has heard of, even though it has, you know, got a big following, including myself.
Right.
A lot of people who like follow mostly the big console games, Halo and stuff like that, they might not have ever heard of Sable. This might be the first time they're ever hearing of it. It's not an established IP. The devs aren't really people who have made things that people would recognize that much before. And so the trailer needs to sell itself completely on its own merits, right? And they managed to break one of the many rules of indie trailers. I would call it rules because these are rules that I tend to stick to, and that is I tend to keep them under 90 seconds.
Right.
And I tend to make it so the first 15 seconds absolutely make their point. The rules are a little different when you're showing your trailer on a big live stream, because the big live stream has got millions of eyes on it who aren't going to take their eyes away. If you're only selling your game via like Steam or social media,
true, yeah,
you need to be quick about letting people know what the hell this game is, because they'll just scroll onwards, right? But there is nowhere to scroll in a live stream, so it's fine to take your time with it. So the Sable trailer is 1 minute and 40 seconds, just a little bit beyond what I would usually make it, but still I do find it noteworthy. But Sable, the trailer, most noteworthy to me is that it does take its time. It does allow itself to just be a pure vibe. A lot of the stuff they sold early on for the game, like to get the following that it did, the sort of like hover bike over the sand stuff.
Yeah, right.
That stuff they released as GIFs early on. That's great for social media. Someone sees a sand thing GIF and they're like, wow, cool, I'm following these people.
Right, yeah.
That doesn't appear in the trailer until like 40 seconds in. But they get away with that. If I was making a trailer for Sable for social media, boom, I'd open with the bike.
Yeah, right.
If they're showing it on E3, they can leave it as long as they want. They can build towards it. They literally build towards it. They show the bike being built, and then they show the person like riding it. And I love that they have the slower music. It isn't too punchy. It isn't like, you know, like the trailer I made that ended up at E3 for El Paso Elsewhere, which is by Strange Scaffolding. That was a really punchy trailer. It's like really loud, crunchy music. These people, they're using a lot more. They're using sort of slower music, a lot of interesting fades. They're using like I use fades quite sparingly, but like when they work, they just work. And here they everything about this trailer is beautiful. It's just kind of this beautiful sort of time lapse of just existing. It's just pure vibes, and I love that they got away with that, because that's what the appeal of the game is, and they managed to show it off so beautifully. As for Metroid Dread, Metroid Dread, the complete opposite is true, because it's a Nintendo game for a start, and it's been 15 years anticipated or something like that.
Yeah, right.
And like on top of that, people know what Metroid is. People are wondering what it is, you know. I love the sheer boldness, and this is kind of a callback to what they did with, you know, I think it's actually part of Japanese trailer structure as it is anyway, but like the fact that they sort of like show a little bit of something that makes you go, ooh, what the fuck is this? Is this literally Metroid 5? And then it shows in plain text Metroid 5, and you're like, it's Metroid 5. They didn't even reveal the actual name of the game until the end of the trailer, and it lets you get hyped, and then it shows the game in all of its full glory. And like Nintendo get to break the rules of the trailer in every single way simply because they're Nintendo, because people aren't going to take their eyes off it because it's Metroid and it's Nintendo. What the hell is this? They've already sold them on watching the entire trailer. Even if it's a garbage trailer, people will watch from the first second to the last. And yeah, I think Metroid Dread used its time extremely well. It managed to quell a lot of doubts that I had, because like so Metroid is like, a lot of it is just these pure, literally Dread vibes. Like it's a horror game, even if it's 2D incarnations. Horror games, they're all about this tension. They're all about this kind of. There's a lot of interesting questions about morality, like floating in the series, that Nintendo usually don't. They just don't grapple with that stuff, right? They're Mario Tennis, you know. That's what Nintendo does.
Yeah.
And then so it's like we haven't seen anything like that from Nintendo for years. It's almost like they decided that in the sort of Disney-esque sense of that's not very Disney, well, that's not very Nintendo, so let's quietly stop doing it. And it's funny to me that now like the biggest influence on Metroid is Alien.
Yeah, right.
And Alien is now owned by Disney, so good luck ever seeing anything that looks remotely like Alien from Alien ever again. Disney, it was that whole thing where Disney was like, oh, we bought Fox. Don't worry, we're not going to change anything about how Fox operates. And then within about 2 months, there was reports that the people at Disney were like, uh-oh, about Jojo Rabbit, because it's not very Disney. And it's like, yeah, well, that's what happens. Disney just buys these studios, and then they decide what's not very Disney, and then everything that they ever release is very Disney. We have less voices in the world. So yeah, like Metroid, they were making Metroid Prime 4, and all they've ever told us about it is that it was coming, and then it was coming a bit later because they effectively scrapped what they had.
Right, yeah.
I just didn't have a lot of confidence in Nintendo to be the studio that would create something like Metroid again.
Right.
And I have like my friend is a much bigger Metroid fan than me. I just like the Metroid vibes. I haven't really played much of the Metroid games myself, but my friend Sam is just, she's really, really into Metroid. And so, like, when I was watching, I was like, oh, I wonder what Sam's thinking right now. It turns out she was hype.
Yeah.
Yeah, just seeing Nintendo come out of the door and, like, squash a lot of those expectations that Nintendo aren't the studio to be able to make a 10th interesting Metroid game. And they just came out and were like, no, we're literally making a game in which you're being chased by alien robots.
Right, yeah.
It's a whole game. You've got to be on your toes. It's going to be weird. It's going to be interesting. We have very creepy music going on. I'm just here like, there's so much confidence in this thing, because like this is exactly the thing that Nintendo shouldn't be confident about after the last 20 years they've had. And yet here they are, just fully upfront. Here's Metroid Dread. It looks great. And so I just loved Metroid Dread. I could never make a trailer like Metroid Dread. Well, I mean, like, technically I could. But it wouldn't make any sense because the people I work for are little indie devs. So it's like, right out the gate, you gotta have the sand bike. Otherwise it ain't gonna work. But yeah, like those are my two favorite trailers, just because of the distinct opposite ends of the spectrum that they live on, and yet they both manage to break the rules just because of the context they're being shown in, and they both achieve so much with the time that they had. Love them both.
Yeah, but it's still funny that after all, they have been overshadowed by the chaos in the end.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I was watching I think it was the PC Gamer stream with some friends, and I think it's Warhammer Chaos Gate was announced, and everybody immediately went in. The whole chat was just people saying chaos.
Yeah.
It's like 5 minutes or so.
Yeah. And do you view trailers differently than other people?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I feel like I definitely view trailers differently from normal people who simply watch trailers.
Right.
Because I know what the strings are being pulled, But compared to, like, other trailer makers, I'd feel like there's a lot of trailer makers in the industry. I don't know many of them personally because I come from a design background, and then I just decided to make trailers. But, like, Derek Liu, he's brilliant. He's been doing this stuff, like, about as long as I've been alive. I didn't realize he had been doing it as long as he had until quite recently. But a lot of his insights are really good. Like, sometimes I learn new things from him. Sometimes I'm validated by him just by what he talks about. Like when he does a talk, when he releases his blogs, that sort of stuff. Quite often it just like comes down to like, yeah, in the end, it's like one thing that kind of like, I've always found that there's no one way to make a trailer, and there was a degree. I think it was a Game Maker's Toolkit did a video on making trailers. Used Derek Liu's stuff as a kind of jumping off point. It was actually quite a good video, but one thing that annoyed me about the video irrationally was that I was like, there is no one way to make a trailer. But then he covers that at the end, right? He's like, this kind of structure is a good thing to consider, but at the same time, every trailer is different. I'm like, yeah, it's good that you covered. But the fact is, in the end, like, the people who know how to make trailers, they kind of know the rules, and they know, like, that really the act of trailer making isn't really it isn't actually a technical task. Like, if you look at the act of filmmaking, it's all about cinematography, it's all about, like, color grading, all of these things. In trailer making, usually you don't need to deal with anything like color grading because you're just taking the game as it is, right? What are you going to do? Color grade a game so it looks different from how it exists? And really all you're doing is, because it's actually quite easy to video edit, you're just, chopping here, chopping there.
Right.
Really the challenges are usually all creative ones. It's all like, how do I approach this? How do I make it so that this shot works into this shot? How do we keep the momentum here? And a lot of what I did with a lot of my trailers that I'm making are always like creative challenges. The one that I made for E3 though was not a creative challenge. It was a technical one, which is an interesting flip of the switch. Because that was for El Paso Elsewhere, Strange Scaffold. It's basically like a Max Payne meets Constantine meets...
Yeah, like Painkiller, right?
Yeah, it's like a PS2 throwback thing.
Yeah, right.
That game sells itself because it's a guy with double guns diving around in slow motion. Like,
right.
I could sell that game in my sleep. So it turns out that this was one of the first times that I ever came up with a plan for how the trailer should look, and then made that trailer almost exactly as I described it, and it worked because the game it was so obvious what the opportunities were and how best to squeeze the most out of them that I could do it without even playing the game first.
Right.
But like all the challenges then were technical because it was one of those rare situations where I got to play with the camera tools and position the camera and try and capture shots. So often I had to play the game with the camera away from where my character is. Therefore, I can't aim.
Right.
I have to get a decent shot anyway. So that it was all like trying. It was basically it was like trying to be an action movie director whilst also being the blind actor in frame.
Yeah.
It was tricky, but like it was really interesting to have it completely flipped in that way. That it's like this thing is no longer a creative challenge.
Right.
Instead, if anything, all I'm doing is improving upon it as I go. But the technical elements of it were really challenging, and it was really fun to try and grab some of the more ambitious shots in there. A lot of those shots, like I think towards the end, there's a bit where there's weird angel-like creature fires like a missile type thing down at the ground. It explodes next to James, the main character. He rolls away in slow motion, pulls out a shotgun, blows a vampire away, points up, shoots the angel that shot at him, and you see the angel. That's made out of 4 shots: the angel firing its missile, James rolling out the way, the bit where he has the shotgun and shoots the 2 things, and then a close-up of the angel. Oh, and then there's him diving backwards away from a vampire. All of those shots were captured in completely different play sessions.
Oh wow.
Because it just doesn't make any sense, because you have to move the camera in between the shots, right? So in the end it was like I just captured a few shots that felt right, and then I identified moments of like, oh, so the angel fires a missile at me here. It would be great to get a shot of it doing that. So I would then point the camera at the angel and grab that and then put it at the start, So it's like, yeah, in the end, it's like trying to get those things to tie together. And if you look really closely at the way they sort of fell together, the angel fires its missile thing at it fires it at what feels like a 45-degree angle down. The actual angle at which the missile falls down next to James is more like from vertical straight above.
Right.
So those 2 things don't actually mesh particularly well. The frantic action of the trailer, it works perfectly. Yeah. It's fine. So yeah, like in the end, a lot of those things are just like technical challenges, but it's rare that a trailer gets to be that, and it was really exciting to mess with that.
And is there an area of trailer making that nobody realizes just how hard it actually is, but you wish like you could put the spotlight on there and say, well, you don't really realize how difficult this is, you just assume it's easy, but it is really difficult?
Yeah, I think it really is just a matter of keeping momentum. So, the shots, but so a lot of the glue shots, it really comes down to you want to show a bunch of things, but if you stack certain shots next to each other, they just don't carry momentum from place to place. Again, the El Paso Elsewhere trailer ended up being a matter of, there are some shots in there that I reversed. I switched them from I flipped them horizontally, so James would be running with his guns from left to right rather than right to left. So those aren't so I'll flip those just so that the feeling that everything is moving in a certain direction all matches up, and so it never undermines itself in a way that just doesn't work. I feel like a lot of trailers, the ones which I feel like are bad or just don't go anywhere, are the ones that just don't have that momentum. I've helped out on a couple of trailers that I wouldn't put them in my portfolio because they aren't really my trailers. Like
Right.
the final cut was never mine. Like Skatebird, I worked a little bit on that.
Oh, nice.
But it was like that's a neat trailer in the end. But effectively, like an earlier version of their trailer, there was the reason why they came to me is because they identified something about this isn't working. What is it? And then when they handed it to me, the first thing I did was just rearrange a lot of the footage that they already had, so that like a shot of a kickflip here. And a shot of you like jumping onto a rail and grinding here, those two things feel like they connect like with momentum. The momentum is what carries them between the things. In the end, they end up changing from a piece of music that I chose to another piece of music, and they just laid that over the top of a lot of the things that I edited, with a few things changed. But even though the cuts were no longer landing on where the music was, the momentum still carried, and I feel like that's always the most interesting thing, because as much as I try and edit towards what the music dictates, like there's a beat here, cut, there's a beat here, cut, the really important thing is momentum.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I feel like people overlook that all the time, so...
Yeah, okay. And, well, if you still have time, I would move on to one final segment of your portfolio and your skills, and that would be writing. So, just in general, like you've written a couple of games, designed a narrative and everything. So, like, can you maybe go into detail, like, what is it like the process of writing like a game or like a murder mystery?
It tends to be different on a game-by-game basis, but like with 2001 A Space Felony, I was writing with my co-writer Lucy, and the way that I always think about writing is it's kind of like, it's very loosely a three-stage process, and that is like, first draft, just like narrative design, right? First thing is just narrative design. What does the thing need to say, and where is it going to say it?
Right.
The second stage is like the first draft. You just get a version of that in script form that realistically, if you died, they could record that dialogue and it'd be fine, I guess. It wouldn't be very good, but it's fine. And then the third part is making it so that it's no longer first draft, making it as good as it can possibly be, right? So it's a three-stage process loosely, and I always hold to this opinion that you cannot write your best work alone, and the best way to approach it is to give at least one of these three jobs to somebody else. Somebody else should have one of these three jobs. So like in the case of 2001 and Once Upon a Crime in the West, I was the guy who did the narrative design, so I was drawing colossal diagrams of how mysteries worked and just designing this entire story, figuring out what each line needed to communicate. And then I wrote a first draft of the script, which was not very good. My co-writer Lucy, she would call them dog shit scripts. She's like, Gary, she kept like, I would sit there while she was doing it because like I needed to keep everything on task, right? I didn't want her to change what I was writing too much so that it would like undermine part of the message that like ties over to something over here, because these things are all interwoven, so I had to be there for the whole. But she'd just be sat there and going like, Gary, this sentence is dog shit, and I'm like, I'm sorry. This is the thing though, I can write better than what I wrote there, but like it's always better to give one of those jobs to someone else. And she had the third job, which is take the words and make the words good. And she did that for both 2001 A Space Felony and Once Upon a Crime in the West, and she did a brilliant job. I've had situations before where I've narrative designed the thing and then first drafted, then like had someone else do the first draft, and then I would come in the back end and effectively edit the to a final draft. And on top of that as well, I've had situations where like I come in and it's already narrative designed. They're like, we need this story written. Or sometimes it's like, we have written the story, it's not very good, please edit it, that sort of thing.
Right.
So it can be like freelance, it ends up being all over the place. Typically the way that I like to work things is that honestly I can make good sentences. I'm good at making good sentences, but it's my least favorite part of it. I really like narrative designing. So like I honestly think of like making words actually really impactful, to be really boring. It's a really boring thing to do, but I know other people who really like doing that. So why not work with them? When I do my own games, I typically do the design and the first draft, and then I hand off the other, the final part to Lucy. Usually it's Lucy. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. National Insecurities is very much a me, Lauren, and Lucy situation. Whereas when I work with freelance, I've worked with friends freelance, I've worked with complete strangers freelance, and it can be very interesting to mix that thing up. So someone might be designing it, and I'll do the second bits. It can always be really hard to edit your own work, though. Like, doing the second and third parts yourself is actually really hard, but it is doable.
Right.
But I recently had work. I was doing some work with NetSpeak Games, who are working on a game called Sunshine Days, which is a little game about living in a town with a bunch of animal people, and I wrote some quests for that. I wrote like the first couple of story arcs. Initially, I was working for them freelance on my own, and that was really difficult, and I let them know this is really difficult. It's taking longer than it ought to. This is probably costing you more money than it ought to, and here's what I think you should do. You should let me bring on my friend, and then you should basically divide the amount of pay that you're already paying me to pay me and her.
Right, makes sense.
Me and my friend Sam.
Yeah,
because like, even though we'll be putting in overall the same amount of hours, the results will be so much better and come together so much faster. And I was right about that.
Right.
It was still difficult, but like having Saf there to bounce ideas off when we were designing things, and then also having her edit my stuff on the back end. She wrote a few quests herself as well, so I would then edit those.
Okay.
It's just great. Just like having two writers in the same place who are both on the same page. It's just high fives all around. Yeah. So I really just stick to this thing of, you cannot write your best work on your own, no matter how much of a genius you are, how much you think people will step on your creative vision. Always bring in a second person. Yeah. Another person is incredibly valuable to write.
And have you ever intentionally given like any let's just call them shitty dialogue or shitty lines to your partner to see like, I don't really know, like something along those lines, and then they were like, wow, this is like totally shitty, and you're like, yeah, I know, but like I don't know how to, like, I don't know what I want to do with this. And then something came back and was like, wow, yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted. Yeah, right, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always trying my best. I'm never deliberately handing someone something less than what is my best. But often I have handed someone, like, a bad line and been just like, I just don't know how to do this. Usually it comes down to, one of my favorite things about writing, and I've heard a couple of writers say that they hate this part, is the glue. I love, basically, I often see, I see a scene, every scene, as just getting from point A to point B. Right. Things need to change. Like, by the end of this thing, this character needs to be angry at this character, and therefore they will do this. And so it's like, sometimes you kind of like, in the design phase, you're like, the following 9 scenes need to happen. How do we get from this scene to this scene? And that's like some of my favorite things to do, but also they are often the hardest. They're often the hardest things to do. Like, you're just there, like I don't really know. We need to convincingly turn this tone of this scene on a dime.
Right.
And I don't know how to do that in this moment. Like, sometimes it really requires. I found that if I hand it to another writer, they're also just as stuck as me. But if we have a little call about it and we discuss the scene, we'll often just nail it together on the spot, like it's just having the back and forth, because it's like every single mental roadblock that you and your other writer would face individually, you can just clear with each other, right? You just pass back and forth until it's like just speed running the process of writing. It's great. So yeah, like, those are the things that always get me. I've heard other writers just be like, I love coming up with scenes, I hate coming up with the connective tissue.
Yeah, right.
I love the connective tissue. The connective tissue is where I live. So yeah, I guess that just about answers your question. Yeah. Yes and no.
Okay. And like, what is the benefit of scribbling a game's narrative structure onto a table instead of a notebook, for example?
Oh, you saw that? So for context for people listening, the desk that I have is just this big white IKEA thing. It's really cheap, but it's just white. And I discovered in making 2001 that unlike Disorient on the Murder Express, the mystery was too big, and my notebook just wasn't big enough. So I was like, you know what, this table's actually really cheap. If I can write on this thing in pencil and it turns out it doesn't rub off, then I guess I'll just pay like £15 for a new table. It's fine. This is like the cheapest table. So I just started scribbling these big old diagrams. I cleared half the desk. I tucked my computer all over to one side, so I had this big open space, and that allowed me to have the space to just design the entire narrative structure of the thing and connect the clues and do all the things and make it make sense to my mind. Like if you looked at what I put out there, like here's the narrative structure of our game, it doesn't make any sense to anybody but me. You couldn't use it as a walkthrough guide. It's just the scribblings of a madman, but it is all there, and it can be traced back to scribbling on the table. And sometimes you just need that extra space, especially with something as convoluted as 2001, because the problem is that like with 2001 you might like come up with an idea and then it turns out there's a lot of things that you didn't consider, like you need to write a line for in case the player does this before they do this,
Right.
And so like in a notebook, if suddenly you notice that, you just don't have any room to like squish that into space, right? In the case of like a big desk though, you can literally just tuck that in there. And it turns out, I could erase things from this table. It turns out that, like, if I use an eraser followed by a wet wipe, it just get rid of it completely.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I erased a few things, reworked a few things. It just gave me the space to do that, where I just wouldn't have had that in my notebook. As for Once Upon a Crime in the West, I tried doing the same with that, but it turns out that game is it's a narrative design problem more than it is like a... Because I guess, like, in the case of Once Upon a Crime in the West, it's set over the 12 days of Christmas. And these characters, again, the connective tissue, they need to go from A to B, right? They need to go from this is their situation on one day, this is their situation on another. Some of those things can happen off screen, but we wanted to show a lot of what that was on screen. And so it was like, I have 12 days, and therefore I need to spread these things out kind of evenly, because if it's like all the things happen on day one and nothing happens on day three, then what the fuck is day three doing there?
Right, yeah.
So I basically found that putting that in on a table didn't make any sense, because I was constantly erasing things and then writing something else over here, and then it was just, I was erasing more than I was writing. So in the end, for that one, I ended up finding that post-it notes made more sense, and sticking them on my walls. So I basically had like day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, all the way up to 12. And then I would have events. I color coded them as well. I forget how I color coded them. Oh yeah, it was like effectively I made it so that I roughly wanted it so that every single day up to day 12, because day 12 is the one where you're solving the murder.
Right, yeah.
Days 1 through 11 would all contain, at the very least, an important clue, a character moment. So I wanted to teach you something about a character, and that doesn't necessarily, in fact, need to be separate from the clue. Those two things can be one and the same, but sometimes sometimes a clue is just a clue, and sometimes a character moment is just a character moment. But I did want at least both to exist in every single day.
Right.
And the third thing I wanted to include in there, and this was more of a game design thing, was I wanted every day to have a gimmick. So like day 1, you are putting wood on the fire and then lighting the fire. Day 2 or day 3, I forget, you're sweeping the floor.
Right, yeah.
There's day 5, you're playing this game of cards. Day 8, you're playing the piano. Day 11 is the one where you're being taught how to take a photo.
Yeah, right.
I want every single day to have its own mechanical thing. It needed to have its own gimmick. In the case of both days 4 and day 9, both of those take place outside of the cabin.
Right, yeah.
Like one is just, on the campfire. One of them is up in the mountains where they're like doing some target practice. I didn't really feel the need to have those be mechanically different, because the gimmick in themselves is, we're somewhere else. That's
right.
We did add a few things anyway, though. We made just a couple of little neat moments in there. In the case of day 4, it's that you can look between the characters when one super Scottish guy is talking and the other Scottish guy who talks more clearly translates for him. You you could kind of control the pace at which that was happening by looking between them. Yeah, we have a little, except nobody really notices that. That was one of the, I guess, failed experiments of that game. Luckily, none of those experiments in that game fail so hard that it stops people from completing the game.
Right.
But there are some elements of that game that people just don't notice are happening. I guess we did a similar thing with Day 8, where you're playing the piano and a character is teaching you how to play a piano. This one worked a lot better, though, which is characters teaching you how to play piano. She's teaching you how to play the 12 Days of Christmas. And then another character comes in, and she sits down at a table, and the woman who's teaching you how to play piano, she's like, "Keep going, darling, you got this. I'm just," she just goes off to this other table, and they're kind of speaking very conspiratorially about secrets under their breath, and they only do this while you're playing the piano. If you stop playing the piano and like look at them, she stops talking and she's like, "Keep going, darling, you're doing great." And then keep playing the piano, and she'll be like, "So did you get the money?" So you're like listening in on them. So you're kind of eavesdropping whilst playing the piano, and that worked a lot better. People kind of understood that more. But the Day 4 translation one, most people don't know it's even happening.
Right.
But yeah, like as a sort of thing. Largely forgot what the question was, by the way. I'm just going off on one now.
That's totally fine. And I think, this is also a great point to end the episode. I have one final question of one final little segment left. But before we go here, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
It's been a pleasure.
There's something you want to plug, or where can people find you? What are the socials?
The socials are at Gary J. Kings. For my personal thing, there you can find basically everything that I do, including my shitposts, including my Hobbit fan edit, which by the time this episode comes out will probably be about 2 months out. But whatever. And my trailers and all that stuff. As for National Insecurities, we're a bit quiet on the socials these days, but you can find us at NI Presents. itch.io, like finding our games, you can just type into Google National Insecurities and you'll just find us as like the first link, and that's where you can find our games. And I don't really feel any need to plug anything else. I think I'm all good here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I also will put on the games and everything into the show notes as usually, so people can follow you more easily. And yeah, if you want to follow the show, you can follow us at Yumi Industry on Twitter and on Instagram, where we usually post like, behind the scenes pictures or, just shitty drawings or something. And also sometimes bad opinions or sometimes good opinions. And also if you want to follow even more bad opinions, you can follow me at Dorian Chow on Twitter and on Instagram. And we're also on Facebook recently for whatever reason, because, well, let's be honest, it is Facebook after all. Yeah,
Facebook's the future, man.
Well, all the Oculus people, and now they are going to integrate podcasts. So if I'm going to blow up because of that, please, Mark,
I'm absolutely in the whole Facebook ecosystem because I'm a big VR guy. I've got an Oculus Quest 2. I love that damn thing, but at the same time, it's like, man, I was hoping at some point I could just erase Facebook from my life, and now they're here forever.
Right, but you know what? The positive thing is now you can follow. You can give us a like. You can like the page. Wonderful. And for the final, wait a second. You can also give us 5-star reviews on iTunes, of course, and Apple Podcasts, and also follow us on Spotify. You know the thing. There's no sponsor here. Just put some likes there. It doesn't hurt. And for the final segment, I thought it would be funny because since you're like the trailer expert here in this environment, I would just give you a couple of company names or developers, and you just give me like a quick, let's just say like 3 words something, or like a short sentence on how do you think they trailers are, because most of the time some of these trailers from these companies are quite notorious or quite infamous or like are very, very popular.
Yeah.
So I will just give you the company name and then you will tell me something about them, even if or you can just say horrible or go to hell.
I can just say horrible.
Yeah, so let's just start with some of the biggest ones. Valve.
Okay, so I really, really like the Half-Life Alyx trailer. I think it's brilliant. I think that was actually Derek Liu as well. He was really good. He just did that thing brilliantly. I've been meaning to work on a VR trailer myself for a while. I've I find it very exciting to do that. I think Valve are really good at making trailers. They don't do it often because they don't make games often enough.
Right.
Make more games, Valve. But yeah, like I think they're really good at what they do.
Okay. Rockstar Games.
Rockstar are wild. They get to break all the rules. I honestly don't like. I do and I don't like the way that they do the trailers for, like, I think they did GTA 4, GTA 5, Red Dead. They did that kind of like, in the world of Red Dead Redemption, you have this, that, and like it feels like they're kind of selling their piece of art like a boxed product with bullet point features, and I feel like it devalues itself in a kind of way. It kind of robs it of all its mystique. But in the end, it's Rockstar Games. They're going to sell a billion zillion copies anyway, no matter how weird they go about it. But at the same time, it does quite effectively just cover what the hell the game is in a really quite bare naked way, in a way that I do sort of appreciate. I appreciate on a designer level knowing that much about their games, but at the same time, I don't think it's the most effective way to get people hyped for them. It's odd.
Right. Naughty Dog.
Naughty Dog are really interesting in that they're not interesting. They kind of cover their trailers a lot of the time simply like their movies. And that's interesting in itself, just because I find there is that interesting crossover where movies created trailers, right? And then games just took from them. And it's interesting that, like, a lot of the time I'm fighting against that. It's like, game trailers don't need to be movie trailers because they aren't movies. Games have fundamentally different goals. In the case of Naughty Dog, they have the same goals as movies. Their games are all movies. They're just playable movies, like and so when it comes down to most of their trailers, they are just movie trailers, and they're very effective movie trailers. And it's interesting to me to be able to see this trailer. If I saw this kind of trailer, like the Last of Us 2 trailer for any other game, I'd be like, they shouldn't have done this kind of trailer. They should have lent into what the game was a little bit more. But in the case of Naughty Dog, they're such a known quantity. They're putting out games that are very movie-like, and so making a movie-like trailer as well, it really just fits,
Mm-hmm.
So I think all of these companies that you just brought up, they're all good at making the trailers that they ought to. I think it really comes down to the fact they have all the money in the world.
Right.
Because they probably have a ton of analytics and stuff. The one I dislike the most, though, is the Rockstar thing, because I really do feel like that sort of box product mentality, it isn't especially a healthy way to portray your games,
Sure, okay. And then let's go on to a couple of specific people who make the trailers. Let's go on to Toby Fox.
I think he's really playful. I think what he does is really playful and interesting. I haven't seen any of his trailers in a while, to be honest, but generally, like, I think a lot of what he does with his own games and his own music, all of that stuff, it's just very creatively playful, and that always carries over to trailers, honestly. I really like them.
And last but, of course, not least, especially with me, Hideo Kojima.
Oh my god. He gets to break all the rules. He breaks all the rules constantly. I remember when I was a kid being excited for Metal Gear Solid 4, and there was a bit in this 15-minute trailer for Metal Gear Solid 4 that had Otacon crying in a helicopter, and that didn't even make it into the final game. And it's just like, what is he doing? Like, at that point, though, I was hype as fuck, right? Because, like, it's Hideo Kojima. He gets to get away with it. It's a Hideo Kojima game. 9-minute trailer for Death Stranding. You're going to come out with more questions than you have answers. It's part of the game. Honestly, I think of Hideo Kojima's trailers as part of the game experience. Being hyped for a Kojima game it's not even a trailer. It isn't a trailer at that point. He isn't trying to sell you his game. His trailers are made for people who are already sold on the concept of Hideo Kojima, and he's just giving you a taste of what's to come, right?
That's right.
They're almost like demos. Though I do also think that Hideo Kojima is like an industry figure. I find him both interesting and uninteresting in that, like, he's the guy who gets to do whatever he wants, and that makes him interesting. But I don't think he should be interesting. I think he should be totally fucking normal, because I think other people should get to do what he does, and I think it's sad that they don't get to do what he does, There aren't people who are given the amount of creative freedom that he's given with all that money. Like, you only find that kind of creative freedom in indie games.
Right.
But, like, for some reason, he's just broken past that, and there is nobody else like that It's weird.
Yeah. And that's the end of the episode.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah, thanks again for coming on the show. And hope you all enjoyed the episode. And yeah, please.
I did.
Yeah, I mean, that's at least one person. That's all
Yes.
I wanted. So yeah, hope you will enjoy the next episode and check out all the other episodes. And I guess check out the Let's Play if they are online from the games Gary did. I sure had a fun time, and you will see also some dumb moments by me struggling around. But as we now learned, these are all part of the design process, and these are all calculated. So you're welcome, Gary. I played along being stupid.
Hell yeah.
Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.
See ya.